But if we get more, we'll pause and do those things, so. Yeah, why don't we take some, we'll take some time to do some. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good. Do you want to start?
I'll start.
Okay,
We
we'll
just
do
thought about
introductions.
doing introductions quickly. And well, good afternoon. My name is Francisco Gonzalez. I am a council member representing District 12, which is Washington County on the east part of the metro. And I am the co-chair of the EAC. My day job, I work for Minneapolis Public Schools at the Office for Equality and Civil Rights. And this is my last year, final year on the council, so this is my fourth year on the EAC, third year.
Okay. I'm Leah Goldstein-Moses. I've been the co-chair since April of 21 of the EAC and joined the EAC, I believe, in 2019 before that, so a couple of years before that. When I was not volunteering for the Met Council, I run a research company and where we do work with metropolitan communities on a statewide level, around the state, learning about people's issues and needs. And I think that's all I need to say. I have 2 kids. I live in Eagan. I have a husband. All right.
I'm Naomi Shakir. I'm an equity consultant in the old EEO office. I've been here since the end of January.
I'm Lila Altawili, Enterprise Equity Senior Manager.
Hi, I'm Phil Sterner. I represent District 15 in Dakota County, which is Eagan, Rosemont, River Grove Heights, and Burnsville, and I live in Burnsville. I'm a single dad of 5 kids, and my day job usually is I do insurance, financial services. I've been doing that since I'm like 21 years old.
I'm Edward McDonald, sometimes described as a troublemaker. No, don't give it for I'm not a troublemaker. I represent District F on the EAC for the Met Council. And this is, I'm sure, my 2nd year of service with this committee and enjoying the journey. My day job is I serve as the interim executive director for the East Metro Civic Alliance. And that organization is the rebirth of the old St. Paul Urban League. And its primary purpose is to work on preserving the 90-year history of all of the archives of the St. Paul Urban League, which, if many of you may know, was one of the foundational organizations for the Black community, but have, become all-inclusive as it evolved. Noted for things like being the founding organization for United Way of the St. Paul area, which is now Greater Twin Cities United Way, Minneapolis Urban League, the St. Paul branch, oldest branch of the NACP, and have had all kind of iconic figures, African-American figures, that have been a part of its existence. Most notably would be people like Sharon Sells Belton, Roy Wilkins, who led the NACP. And like before, that organization worked on equal opportunity for all. Its expectation for people that work for it or serve on its advisory board or the board of directors is to be strong advocates for equal access and opportunity, particularly for protected group members, and to be very, very studied on that subject matter, because there is a belief if the administrative application of those laws are adhered to, you do not have socioeconomic disparities. So as you guys talk today, you'll probably hear me advocating that to the fullest extent of my responsibilities as a community, as a member of a protected class community. and someone who holds near and dear the work of my ancestors in the civil rights movement to bring those laws to fruition. I like to say that, people like Roy Wilkins led the NAACP in the civil rights movement, but Minnesota is not, it was not silent on that matter. Hubert Humphrey, who served as vice president, was one of the key stewards for the implementation of the Civil Rights Act of '64. Walter Mondale was the lead person on the establishment of the Fair Housing Act in 1965. So we have sort of a special obligation here in the state of Minnesota to get it right. And in the world that I operate in, as Minnesota goes, so does the nation. We get it right, then everybody else across the nation get it right. So it's a big responsibility, but I enjoy that place and being one of those people that have the honor of continuing to be the voice of that.
Well, it's hard to follow that, but I'm Abdullahi, Transportation Equity Coordinator with Minnesota Department of Transportation. At least that's my day job. I have sort of volunteer type of role as a city council member in Brighton, Minnesota, but that's not what I'm here for today. I'm here to speak about transportation equity on behalf of MnDOT. We'll have a short presentation that I'll get later. Good to meet everybody and good to see people in person.
Meredith Klukaka. I'm the Shared Mobility Program Manager for Metro Transit. Been in that role for about 3.5 years, originally from Delaware, Ohio. So lots of Midwest living over the last 20 years or so. I live in South Minneapolis now. We're going to be here to talk to you about the Metro Transit Micro, which is the new micro transit project up in North Minneapolis City.
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Dan. I'm a colleague of Meredith. I work at Metro Transit Service Development, so I'm a transit planner, primarily working on fixed route. So it's been a delight to work on this micro transit project. It's a very different kind of animal. I'm very excited to explore and introduce you all to this particular project. I'm a Minneapolis resident, originally from the Seattle area, but I've been here for about all of my adult life, so I call Minnesota in the Twin Cities home.
I'm Tori Hampton. I'm new here. I've been here for 2 weeks now, and I am the new OEEO officer too here in the Office of Equity. And I actually know you from working at MnDOT. And I was like, I'm finally getting to meet you in person because we've been virtual for forever working on the transportation equity, and you edited my equity paper that I did for livability. So it's nice to meet you in person.
Good to meet you.
And yeah, I'm just here to listen and get to know everybody and learn. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure, yeah. Hello, nice to see you in person, and nice to be here today. I'm Selena Martina. I'm Senior Manager for Equity and Inclusion on Metro Transit. Often come to these meetings. Sometimes I get to present, sometimes I get to listen, so it's great to be in person with you all.
I'm Chantel Buckleton, and I am the Program Technical Specialist for the Office of Equity Club.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cy Jordan, the Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity.
Would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah.
Sure. Sorry I was late, apologize. I'm Vanessa Jenkins, and I believe it's District G.
Maybe.
I believe you. I'm glad to be here. I just love coming because I just like to be around smart people and just learn and grow.
Well, because we have a small meeting today, we'll have our discussions maybe a little less formally than we normally will. But one of the things we do want to make sure is that everybody who has something to say gets a chance to say what they want to say, that we can hear lots of voices. So that might mean at times that we say, okay, let's move on and make sure we've heard from everybody. So I just want to put that out in the air now so you're not surprised if we move on. And also, if you're someone that doesn't usually speak up, I really want to make sure this is your invitation to speak up because we need your voice too. And I think we're gonna skip over the approval of the minutes and approval of the agenda because we do not have a quorum, but we should still do the public invitation, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, do you want me to do that part?
Do we have anybody that signed up to speak for this meeting today? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Who's that?
Oh, members from the public?
From the public.
I apologize, no, we do not.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
All right.
Sorry.
All right. And I know that we are now having work groups rather than subcommittees, and
Oh, yeah.
the operations subcommittee did not meet, but we did do a little bit of work that I'll reference a little bit later when we get to the committee business. I don't know if the affordable housing subcommittee met. Anybody else know, or work group?
Do we have any members here?
I think Edward is on that, and maybe Vanessa, you are too, affordable housing, but did you meet at all? No, last one? All right, and transportation, members are not currently.
Okay.
So I think we can turn it over to the Metro Transit micropilot project.
Thank you. Oh, dancing on only this one, is that correct?
It should come up. Oh, there it goes.
It's coming. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Great, well, thanks everyone. We have a pretty short, we've tried to keep it to 10 to 15 minutes to give like lots of time for discussion. But as we're going through, if you have questions, please interrupt. Or save it to the end if you don't feel comfortable interrupting. So, we are here today to talk through our new microtransit pilot called Metro Transit Micro in North Minneapolis. And for those of you that aren't familiar with microtransit, it's essentially demand responsive transit. So it's like transit on demand as opposed to that with a fixed route schedule. Microtransit is technology enabled, so you would request your trip through an app. It's real time, the routes and schedules are dynamically generated. Sometimes you're sharing trips with passengers, but all of this is happening actually on privately managed technology. So transit agencies themselves don't run the microtransit, software. Essentially, they go out to bid for it, and that's true across the country. There's some examples locally, if you're familiar. Southwest Prime is one of the microtransit services that's better established in the metro region, MBTA Connect, but this is just the first one that will be happening with MTS and Metro Transit. I wanted to address the question you might be asking, which is why microtransit when we're running traditional fixed route service. So some of the reasons, since 2010, transportation has changed pretty significantly. We have on-demand services like Uber and Lyft, so there's new expectations from a traveler perspective. We have changing technologies, changing travel patterns, and essentially transit agencies are asking this question that you see at the top, which is how do we adapt to these? So I think the interest in the Metro Transit and MTS side is how do we adapt to these changing technologies and give customers what they want at the same time as kind of keeping with our core service that we run traditionally. So we definitely have a desire to understand and integrate with these services because we know they're really important for first last mile. So like scooters and bikes that you see around the Twin Cities region. For people that are kind of trying to make that last trip to their homes, it can mean the difference between it taking 5 minutes or it taking 20 minutes. So we definitely try to accommodate those. And this project actually was at the top of the priority list when I came on board for Metro Transit and we started the shared mobility program. So out of the 7 kind of top tier strategies that the agency wanted to invest in, this was pretty much number 1.
So with that premise in mind, one of the first questions that we had to ask ourselves was, where do we even pilot this thing? Where does it make sense? Other agencies across the country have piloted in a variety of locations and environments, most notably in suburban and rural kind of fringe communities where fixed route is challenging or expensive to operate. We went with a different kind of lens to evaluate our potential candidates for this type of service. And that lens was shaped by two goals: expanding mobility choices, especially to low-income and BIPOC communities, and then also expanding access to our high-frequency network. So that narrows down very quickly the range of locations that we would be looking at. And when I also say access to high-frequency network, it means that we need to be near existing facilities, near existing or planned transit ways. So see on this map in this area of North Minneapolis that we have determined will be our project boundaries when we launch. It is an area that includes a variety of fixed route services, local routes, and also BRTs, such as the existing C-Line service, as well as Route 5, and that corridor is going to be upgraded to BRT in December. And, you know, when we think about deciding between where exactly it makes sense to create this zone, even if we chose the C line or the D line, we'd have to decide where along the route it is. So we looked at metrics such as the density of the population and employment. We looked at where low-income residents live, where our BIPOC communities are living. We also looked at some other kind of harder to like visually inspect or harder to look at a data set types of metrics such as intersection density, where you kind of have to create your own analysis of the street network. And we looked at where are our geographic barriers, our large highways, our very impassable multi-lane roads with huge intersections, where are our rivers, our large parks, et cetera. So this solution stood out as an area where we have certainly fixed route service and people riding, but we also have significant barriers for people to have as much mobility as they might otherwise desire or might otherwise take advantage of. So how do we define success given our goals, given kind of the intent behind this project? We are defining success on a few different measures, and these bullet points only capture a few of those metrics that we've explored and are committed to collecting information and data on. The first ties in directly to our goal of expanding mobility choices. We'll be tracking the share of TAP users who are using the service, so TAP being the Transit Assistance Program, where eligible riders who receive other government services can apply for discounted $1 rides. We'll also be looking, of course, at the share of BIPOC individuals who self-report through opt-in surveys that they are using this microtransit service. We'll also be looking at metrics of customer satisfaction, which we can look at a few different ways, including just how well the service is running, like how on time is our trips, how many users are repeat users versus maybe one-time users, and then what's the accuracy that the software is delivering to us in terms of wait times, are riders receiving the correct information, do they feel confident, or are they likely to feel confident about the service that we're providing. And the third bullet here is more sort of in the realm of for a traditional or more so traditional transit metrics for performance. We're going to be looking at things like passengers per in-service hour. So in this context, we might rejigger that to be passengers per vehicle hour, and things like subsidy per passenger. We're looking at the cost effectiveness. And other metrics such as just the overall median wait time that riders might be experiencing in this small zone. So this pilot is planned to launch this fall. It will last about 12 months. And during this period, we're going to be offering a curb-to-curb service. What that means is that riders, when they reserve their trip, they'll either be able to type in an address, they'll be able to drop a pin in the location. We'll also be offering call-in options for riders as well, so they'll be able to talk to a reservationist and make their trip that way instead. As I mentioned earlier, this is a compact zone. It's about 2.5 square miles, so very small. And so we're expecting, short trips to occur, maybe to the grocery store, maybe to a park or some other amenity, the library, elsewhere. We're also going to be offering the service to cover most of the high-frequency network span, so 5 p.m. to approximately midnight, with the ability to provide as many as 5 vehicles on the street at one time, tailor that to the actual demand that we're seeing, and tailor it to how maybe it changes throughout the year, quarterly, seasonally, et cetera. These vehicles are going to be smaller buses. If you see the Transit Link or Metro Mobility buses, they're going to be that type of cutaway, especially wrapped with the Metro Transit Micro brand so that it'll be recognizable on the street and also recognizable as part of the kind of wider family of Metro Transit and MTS services. The other aspect is from a fare perspective, we decided to make this service the same fare as our local fixed route, so that we would hopefully remove some of those cost barriers that we might otherwise encounter in a service where microtransit is treated more as a premium and people pay a premium for it. We want to remove those barriers, help encourage people to make those first last mile trips. There are normal transfer rules, so the free transfer with fixed route or with microtransit over the 2.5-hour period. And of course, all the existing discounts will also apply on this service as well. So if you're a student, if you pay special fare for mobility fares, or if you're a senior, et cetera, of course I mentioned TAP as well.
I think this one is me. So on the contracting side, this is, again, a partnership between Metropolitan Transportation Services, so MTS, under the Met Council, and Metro Transit. Part of the reason for that is because there's interest in both parties. Microtransit could apply to the paratransit or contracted services that MTS does, or to fixed route, BRT, the type of service that Metro Transit provides. So we did a partnership on this first pilot, so everyone can learn something. We contracted out on the software, so the software as a service contract was recently awarded to Via Mobility. They're one of the oldest providers in the microtransit space, so they have, I think, roughly 150 deployments internationally for this style of service, so they're very experienced. They have, I think their bread and butter is more on the paratransit side because they also do turnkey operations, which means they provide the vehicles, the operators, and the software. For us, they're just providing the software. And then on the operations side, that's being MTS's kind of realm. They're going to be handling that through Transit Team, which is one of their existing providers already. So just to differentiate about the roles, because I know it can be confusing, Metro Transit has been doing the marketing, so I'm sure as you saw with the logo, Metro Transit Micro. So we've been doing marketing and promotion, and Victoria's been courageously leading service design and the software procurement on the Metro Transit side. For MTS, they're responsible for contracted operations, since this is sort of their standard operating procedures, since they do those contracted operations, and they're going to be running the system, and they've contributed through the course of the project to service design and some of those decisions that Victoria talked about earlier, like fares. Then I wanted to talk about our outreach and marketing approach because it was, I would say, non-traditional on the outreach, and wanted to kind of provide an explanation. So when we started the service design in 2021, one of the feedback that we got from outreach leadership and from community leaders was there was planning fatigue in North Minneapolis. They had just gone through D-line engagement, C-line engagement, and Blue Line extension outreach. That was a pretty comprehensive project. So the recommendation was to do some targeted events, but actually we put together a summary of all of the engagement activities over the past couple of years to hear from residents kind of what concerns were, what transit needs or transportation needs were, and we used that as the basis for some of the service design decisions. I think that was, in the end, one of the reasons that we went to curb. So microtransit can either be
curb to curb where it takes you from one point and drops you at the other point, or you can meet the vehicle. So it might mean that you're walking a block or so. We decided not to do that because I think there were safety concerns in some of the preliminary outreach that the city helped us with, and that was reported through the summary of those engagement efforts. So our approach so far, we've been doing kind of neighborhood community groups, in-person engagements since mid-May. You'll see probably some things through the local media. We're also working with the city, if you're familiar with their Mobility Hub pilot program. I forget how many locations they have all over the city. I think it's about 20 this year, but with a high concentration in North Minneapolis, so they do outreach at those locations, and this project will be part of that outreach effort as well. We'll have a kickoff event, so that'll be a Saturday press event where we'll have a vehicle. It's actually going to be at the open streets on Broadway. It coincides with the launch over there, so we should have some good foot traffic and give some people exposure to what the service would look like. And then I think the other important piece, this is our first kind of effort towards microtransit. A lot of times in the first time the agencies do it, you have a survey effort at 3 and 6 months that makes lots of decisions about the boundaries, the true boundaries of the service, the frequency, how many vehicles, if the fares are priced appropriately. So a lot of those decisions are flexible when it comes to service design, and they're things that can change over the course of the pilot. And so a lot of people get the service out on the ground and then do a major push and outreach effort, which we will also be doing at 3 and 6 months. And then on the marketing side, just some things that you should expect to see. We have a project website up. Now it's that micro-project link that you have there. We have some print material, but mostly that you'll see the service on our assets, so interior cards, C-line pylons, social media platforms for Metro Transit. So that's where you can kind of expect to see news as the project launches. So just a quick timeline. We have our launch date set for September 10th. Like I said, the education and in-reach, so that's to garages and to our staff as well, as externally started in mid-May. We're getting close to service and software training, so that's where Via Mobility will be coming in and doing training on how to use the software, how it routes, how everything works. And then about 2 weeks prior to launch, you'll see marketing campaigns begin. I'll pause there. We had kind of questions and topics for discussion, but I want to leave some space if anyone has initial thoughts or concerns.
I always have questions. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the one thing I can say off the top is that it really does fit in the diversification of a multimodal approach to transportation. And so thank you for creating that diversification and equity inside of there. The first question is, what is the Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latino demographic breakdown inside of this targeted area? And are there no other comparison areas like Frogtown or Selby or Rondo? Comparatively, the demographic, because you put a big emphasis on the demographic breakdown.
Yep, actually, I'm laughing because I was like, you must be a cartographer. When we were looking at locations initially and kind of seeing where the fit would be appropriate, Frogtown was another neighborhood that came up as a very good fit for this style of service. Ultimately, there were a few things that compelled us to look instead in North Minneapolis, in part because the retention on the C-line ridership was so high through the pandemic. That we knew that there was some real travel needs and that people could really benefit from an additional layer of service. But for the specific breakdowns of the demographics, It's been a while since I've looked at them, so I'm looking to Victoria.
Yeah, we have collected the information, demographics, in addition to demographic information, language information, we've collected information about internet, high-speed internet access, of course, income information, housing status, and owners versus renters. We've compiled that higher level of detail for this zone, but have not done as detailed of a look at other potential areas that we had been investigating, whether it was in St. Paul or elsewhere. But certainly, we could follow up with information about this zone.
Well, you just use this acronym BIPOP, and it all sounds good, but until you get specifics and details, North Minneapolis, to many of us, isn't as BIPOP as it may appear to be and propagandized to be, as some other areas, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, the diversification of those communities. It is propagandized that way, but not necessarily that way. But that's why I just wanted to know the demographic breakdown.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna add to it a little bit. You were still talking, so I'll wait.
Yeah, so this will be all 4 seasons? Okay. And then the last 2 questions, the vendors. I mean, for us, when I look at this equity thing, those become very important things. How do we go beyond, the commoditization of the acronym you use, BIPOP, communities, and really actually utilize them in a lot of this? So is the vendor a minority business enterprise?
No, it's not.
Did you consider a joint venture with a minority business enterprise in order to build capacity? So as you expand this phase of your multimodal approach, you would also be bringing along minority business enterprises that are developing the experience to basically do some of this work.
Yep, that's a great idea. We are not there yet, as this is the first pilot, but Minneapolis has done something that's really interesting that is what you're talking about. So with their scooter program, they've actually subcontracted, so Lime or whoever it is, has been subcontracting with operational folks that are on the ground from the neighborhoods.
So as an equity advisory committee member, those are the kind of things that we want to see. And then there will be employees who will be driving these vehicles and collecting fees and doing a variety of things. Is there a strategy or plan to ensure that there is equity or equal opportunity for residents of this BIPOP community to actually be gainfully employed doing the transportation, you moving the vehicles and those kind of things, maintenance, or I'd probably come back inside, but are those things that are a part of this effort?
Yeah, so Transit Team is one of the current operators, so yes, I think that maintenance, that's a very good question that I don't necessarily know the answer to because it's on the MTS side. I don't know what the hiring practices are exactly, but they have to be consistent with Met Council rules. And so any of the standard rules that would apply to any contractors would be the same in this situation. So it's a large enough contract that all the rules apply.
It would be cool, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, if they could come back again and just kind of delve a little bit more into details and specific as to how this group that they use the acronym for, BIPOP, is being included in the revenue generation and the employment opportunity and the vendor opportunity in this. It's a great idea. I think it's an excellent idea in terms of expanding multimodal approach to transportation, which diversifies that, get at equity, but we need to reach inside to make sure that all communities are benefiting from it from a financial standpoint as well.
I think that Lori had a comment.
Oh, she can go first.
Are you sure?
Vanessa?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna ask, so the 2.5 miles, do you know like that area or what the 2.5 miles is or like?
The boundaries?
Yeah,
Like
the
mostly
boundary.
residential or
Right.
the actual roads.
Yeah.
We can click back.
Sorry, I missed.
Oh, yeah, so this area has some pretty clear boundaries around most of it, where you have I-94 to the east, I-394 to the south, Theoworth Park on the west side, and then Golden Valley Road up to West Broadway, kind of combined boundary on the north end. You'll also see that Dunwoody College on the south, just south of 394, is a little bit of a little blip in the service area, and that's to acknowledge that this particular institution does not have a direct fixed route connection to it. You can get close to Dunwoody College on bus stops that are on other sides of the street, other parts of the intersection, but there is that kind of additional factor of having to cross a very busy intersection at Dunwoody and the Hennepin intersection with the traffic coming off the highway, et cetera.
Right.
And we wanted to provide that access to those educational opportunities and work opportunities there as well.
Okay, thank you. And then you said, so you brought up like the rider apps, like Lyft and Uber, which I love to use them. So would it be the same, like you download an app and you can request, or would it be you call in, like with Metro Mobility? I work for Social Security and I have a lot of clients that come and they're like, oh, it was terrible, and trying to get through and trying to get a ride and trying to get my ride changed. And so there's always issues with Metro Mobility. I don't know if they need more staff or whatever, or they're just overwhelmed, with the people that need their services. But so will it be?
Yeah, they definitely are, I think, overwhelmed. The on-demand, it will definitely be app-based, but we
Okay.
did provide a call-in option in case people don't have access to a smartphone.
Okay.
I think it will be much faster experience if people download the app, so we'll try to redirect people to that piece of it.
Okay.
But
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
I have a question. So I just wanted to ask about the how, okay, so it, just it's simple. So do the buses just stay in this route? So they don't go outside of this route? So say if I was a mom and I needed to go 2 blocks over away from this route, or 5 blocks over or something like that, and I had a kid, it's still, I would just have to get off and walk from that. Okay, that's just clarification, because, a lot of times that's the thing, like, people want to get to work, but a lot of times in these communities, the work is not there, right? But it's still a good option to still pick your kids up for school if you're living in the area. So there's other options that you can have, so it's good to have it, but just moving forward in the future, trying to find a way, to get outside of work, because when I was looking at this area in North Minneapolis when I was working in MnDOT, a lot of people go outside of this area for work. They don't usually work in the area or downtown, so they have to travel far distances, but.
yeah, great point. So this service area is unusually small for microtransit, in part because we wanted to keep wait times low for users, so that when they request a vehicle, it can be there very quickly, so it's comparable to an Uber and Lyft. And when you do that, you have to compromise by keeping the zone smaller. And that's especially true with pilots, because you don't have a huge fleet of vehicles to be working with. But that's kind of getting at what we're hoping to find out at the 3 and 6 month mark. Like, what are the destinations around that people are really trying to get to that would greatly benefit and make it a lot easier for the users.
Speaking of that, like she was saying, parents and kids, and so since they're the smaller buses, so what about there's multiple people use the app, but I have 2 or 3 little, like I had 5 kids. A couple of them are in the stroller at the same time, and then I got the other 3, and I'm just like, I don't even like to think about it. So like in that issue, it's like.
You can add users, so when you go to request the vehicle, you can say 5 or whatever it might be on those, and it will essentially route a vehicle that has the capacity for that
Okay,
crew.
all right, great, thank you.
So the vehicle would go to their home and say they want to go to church on a Sunday. Pick them up at the house, drop them off at the neighborhood church. Or go to the grocery store and drop them at the grocery store.
Yep.
And pick them up there and take them back.
Yep, and you may share, it may not be the most direct path, because it may have to divert and pick up one other user.
Okay.
Although in a service area this small, we'll have to see how the stats play out. You know, it may be that you're only sharing trips with one other person at the most, and that would indicate to us we can probably do an expansion of the service area to accommodate those bigger trips.
Last question, can a parent call and have their under 18 children jump on to go to a relative's house?
Yeah, so good question. This actually came up in the roundtable because the North Minneapolis group really felt like youth would be very interested in this service and their adoption would be really high. So the same rules that apply to Metro Transit rules now will apply to those. Yes, so you can be under 18 and take the service.
Because, okay, so a lot of people don't know, like, if you live in a certain area within the school, you can't take the bus. Right? So like having to walk all those blocks to school and having to get up like an hour early. I used to have to do it. I lived in North Minneapolis, so you know when you live a certain amount of miles away, you don't get the bus service.
Right, because they say you're close enough.
Because you're close enough to
So
get
you don't
to
need a
school,
bus,
so you don't need the bus service.
Yeah.
So this is really good just for that, and especially in the winter time, right?
Yeah.
Because you might want to walk home in the spring, in the summertime, you know, it's fun.
Right.
Yeah.
You
But
and your
then when
friends,
it
right?
gets cold outside, it becomes a little bit more difficult, so including like at least high school students or.
Yeah, and crossing Olson too.
Or-
So some of the schools, since they're adjacent
Yeah.
to that big infrastructure barrier, we anticipate there will have lots of call requests, I think, in some of those neighborhoods.
I have one more question, I know. So as far as the livable things in this area and understanding what people and facilities that people actually use to make it livable, and the services that people actually go to, I'm pretty sure that that'd be some good data to bring back to our committee, just to see like how does the livability work? Like do people actually go to those facilities that's considered livable? Because in North Minneapolis, they struggle with food scarcity and things like that and being able to go, they just have really one grocery store, which is the Cub.
Right.
Right there in North Minneapolis which is not really close to a lot of homes. So just looking at that data in the future will be really good for us and trying to understand how we can make that community more livable.
Yep, so Hennepin County Social Services and the Cub up on Broadway definitely were considerations here about food access. We anticipate that we will get a lot of trip requests over there. We've got to kind of designate a special spot for pickup and drop off so that it doesn't take too much time, so you don't have to circle the parking lot.
North Point churches are going to be
It's really
huge.
nice.
Yeah.
Councilmember Sterner, you have questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple. So one is there's that small grocery store, I think it's Northwoods Grocery that's in North Minneapolis too. So it gives another location. But I was kind of wondering, can they schedule the rides on a certain one? So Edward kind of brought about church and they know they're going every Sunday. Can they just have it on the app where it's scheduled continuously or they got a certain doctor's appointment? Can it just be scheduled longer ways at a time and continuously like that?
Yeah, good question. No, not right now. That is an option in the software, but the way it's set up, we wanted to give people the option of on-demand service as opposed to scheduled. It's something we can look at in the future, and certainly it makes a lot of sense in some areas. A lot of microtransit vendors say that I think anywhere up to 40% of the rides end up being scheduled, even if you only make it on demand or if you give people both options. So I think we'll have to see. So if we get feedback at that 6-month point going, I really want that ability to schedule, it's something we can look at.
Just a tidbit of information. In many of these neighborhoods all over the country, there are these things called Jimmy cabs. And Jimmy cabs are individuals who will, for $5, take their neighbors and family to different places. And it's an economy in and of itself. And these are usually older men and women that drive their car, and you can call them up. And they'll come pick you up, take you to the grocery store for $5, sit there, wait for you, bring you back home. And it's as old as the community is. When Uber and Lyft came, a lot of people said it was usurping that enterprise, that kind of cultural evolved economy that was happening in low-income communities, where transportation and getting around was a tough thing. So I'm just saying, be aware of that. That's important. I don't know the extent to which it exists in North Minneapolis, but I do know it exists in North Minneapolis. And I'm not sure if there'll be pushback or anything like that as a result of it, but they're known as Jimmy cabs that exist within those communities. It may be worth it to have a discussion with people about the Jimmy cab enterprise that exists within communities like that.
Yes, thank you. We will take that back. One of the things we tried to do with the service was price it very different from Uber and Lyft, because the minimum in the Twin Cities tends to be around 7. So this will be around just like our standard fare, so around 2, depending if it's rush hour or not.
I'm only telling you that because you had mentioned that you had to use information from previous engagements about broader transportation discussions. And sometimes it may not seem obvious that the resistance to be in conversations about something like Jimmy cabs and what's going on, because they're not licensed and there are all kind of risks that people take operating those kind of things, people then just rather be silent and not disrupt something that exists.
Good conversation. I had one question that's kind of follow up what Edward mentioned about the vendors, and I understand that. Let me take a step back. I sat through this presentation before when it was before our transportation committee, and after the meeting is over, like all the good questions, it came after I left the meeting. So my question was, so the actual vehicles are going to be owned and operated by Metro Transit or by the Met Council?
The vehicles will be owned by the Met Council, but operated by a contracted service through MTS.
Okay, all right. And I gather about the app itself is by this large company, etc. But again, just like Edward mentioned, I think that the issue of who will be actually providing the vehicles and the transportation service itself, we definitely need to explore ways, perhaps not at this pilot project level, but if we decide to move this on a larger scale, having those folks that might have small businesses or only their own vehicle and they want to be part of the actual moving of people around, to be subcontracted somehow to provide this type of service. I think that would be a great opportunity to have underserved, underutilized businesses being part of this community-based transportation option. And I think that should be part of the concepts that we move forward with this particular project. I would hate to see just another subdivision of Metro Transit provide the actual service. And again, I understand the reasons why the app has to be from this large company, which has tons of experiences, etc. But I think that the real benefit to the community will be on the actual vehicle operators providing the service locally in the communities that they know and which they serve. And I think that should be a core part of this project as we move forward, so.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up and add to yours, I don't think we can continue to be apologetic about things like that. Because it's not equity, it's not fair. It's not fair to have a majority firm contracted to do this in the community without there being some diversification of the workforce. Or there be 4 or 5 contracts to meet your acronym BIPOP definition to do this. We have to be very intentional about this. We've had 60 years of this to communities having to develop Jimmy cab systems. There is a subculture economy that have evolved in those communities to accommodate people around this need because they've been locked out of opportunities to be able to guide public institutions to do the right thing. We shouldn't be apologetic. You're a public institution. Those people pay into the Met Council for the very resources that you are using for this expansion of a multimodal system. They should be included from top to bottom. And it's not enough to bring in a diverse workforce that's basically designing this. It has to go deeper into the utilization of the affected population. So I think it's a very flawed program in the sense of how it's going to operate, because it continues the age-old effort of not being equal and accessible at all levels. I applaud the multimodal approach to it, but I cannot be apologetic and say, well, after the pilot thing, which is fine. I can't do that. No, in the pilot, you should have those vendors doing a joint venture effort with communities of color. You should have them saying, okay, if you're gonna get this contract from us, we need to develop other diverse people being able to do what you do, and therefore we're going to give you this contract under the condition that you joint venture with one of those groups inside of the acronym you use, BIPOP, to basically learn how to do this. But I would say that there is no learning curve inside those communities. I think there are people talented enough to be able to handle what it is that you want to do with technology. They're just not getting the opportunities. In fact, I was just on the phone last night with a guy who does transportation services, run a dashboard everywhere else except for the metropolitan area here, where I know that he's a former football player, University of Minnesota, and played for the Vikings. And we're just talking about his transportation services and him being introduced to more local people to operate his transport service. He runs a dashboard, he's got drivers, they have vehicles, he can lease vehicles and do that whole thing. If you want to know his name, I'll give it to you. But I just think that we cannot anymore, and I don't want to be preaching about this, if we truly are going to be equitable, if we're going to truly comply with the laws that I talked about, Humphrey and Mondale and Wilkins and everybody put on the books, then we have to move that further. And I think that maybe you owe us to come back and say, here's how we're going to address that. Otherwise, we're just an equity committee that's rubber stamping a continuation of the same thing. And I really, truly, honest to God, don't feel comfortable doing that. So please don't make me do it. Just come back and say, here's how we're going to diversify the employee base, the contracts, and other things so that that money that is being invested by those communities can somehow be returned in part to those communities. And they are part of what you're doing. And they don't feel like you're just coming in, getting rid of the Jimmy cabs that were trying to survive economically within the community, doing this without the Met Council's involvement.
Absolutely here on the revenue generation opportunity and like local wealth building. I do think there's a lot of opportunity in shared mobility, and that has been one of the bigger criticisms of shared mobility overall, because it tends to concentrate into VC-backed entities like Uber or Lyft that then go public.
Yeah,
All right, well, good discussion, but fortunately we need to move on since we have another presenter here. Just to follow up, one last thing really briefly, I think that I will bring some of the same questions the next time this issue comes up at any of the committees that I serve, either the Committee of the Whole, the Council, or on the Transportation Committee, just to make sure that this project does follow up and reaches out to the communities it serves across everything that the project is supposed to. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And next we have Abdulle from MnDOT and the Transportation Equity Definition and Statement of Commitment. Welcome.
Thank you very much. This is
I think Greg is gonna.
Yeah. That's the one? Yeah, it works. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, I'm Abdulle, MnDOT's Transportation Equity Coordinator. That is again a new role that MnDOT created just last year. For the first time, MnDOT has somebody that is primary job, which is, at this point it's me, but it's a role that exists. So if I leave the job or don't have that job anymore, there's somebody else that will have that role, which is really important for MnDOT to have somebody looking at leading transportation equity conversations and efforts and policy issues at the highest level. It's a statewide role, so that is my role. And I started last year around this, in the spring of last year. And what I'm talking to you today about is language, specifically how MnDOT is defining transportation equity. Up until last year, we didn't have a unified definition for transportation equity. However, transportation equity has been discussed a lot. It was kind of making its way into some of the formal documents, like our long-range plan. It's called SMTP, or Statewide Multimodal Transportation Plan. It is a 20-year plan that is updated every 5 years. And the last iteration of that in 2017, communities across the state, specifically but more so in the metro area, people wanted MnDOT to do more on transportation equity, to talk and address some of the inequities that exist within the system, especially with the history when the system, interstate system has been created. What does that do? And people wanted more about that. And as we started to do more research on that, as we took on some initiatives, we came across with few issues. The first one being like lack of common understanding of and definition of transportation equity. Everybody wanted to have their own thoughts and angle and twist to it. Some folks wanted to focus on the geographic equity of it. Others wanted to focus on one that is maybe more about racial equity. Others wanted to talk about modal equity and the share of benefits and funding opportunities between the different levels of transportation options, whether it's people walking, biking, driving, or taking transit. So we realized that we really need to define this co-defined transportation equity with community. And when I started last year, we were lucky to have a group of, a base group that we call Equity Advisory Committee, who give us advice and specific feedback on our two main plan documents. One is the SMTP that I just mentioned, the Statewide Multimodal Transportation Plan. The other one is one about funding, so it's called Minnesota State Highway Investment Plan. And we have a group of external and internal members, about 18 members that represent different communities across the state that kind of reviews our materials. So this group put together initial draft language that we then took to engage with people. I actually didn't come, I was supposed to come here, but then I had something that day. So my colleague came to EIC last year, and this group has been one of the most focal supporters, and we had some direct feedback, strong feedback about the initial draft that we shared with you. And today we're sharing the results of that conversation, as well as conversation that we had with over 1,000 people across the state, what that resulted in, which is a new language that defines transportation equity. It also evolved a little bit more than just the definition. It includes an agency commitment to transportation equity. It includes an acknowledgement of historic inequities that is now part of the formal policy plan, the statewide multimodal transportation plan. This is a historic for the agency because we haven't done that before. There has been leaders that did the public apologies to some community members, specifically the Rwanda community, but it hasn't been formalized in this way. So this is that's what I'm sharing with you today. It is still in draft format, and I will share some specific language that we are already using in the next couple of slides. But I wanted to just underline that this is still in draft format, so feedback is still very much welcome. The groups that you see here, so community-based organizations, metropolitan planning organizations like the Met Council, as well as other NPOs across the state, as well as in-reach and internal employees, as well as business sector representatives. Those are all the groups that we connected with, over 1,000 people that we had opportunity to connect with directly. And what we heard is this, and I wish I had the map, but there's a map that I wanted to show, but I didn't send that, I'm sorry. This is a quick summary of what we have heard. When we're doing this engagement about how to define transportation equity last year, we have heard a lot with this group, as well as others that we talked to, that MnDOT needs to be to use a strong and bold language when defining transportation equity. Again, we were having this engagement and these conversations with people 1 year after the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and many communities were still, up until now, people are still actively thinking about that. But not only that, people pay a lot of attention to how governmental systems are either serving or not meeting people's needs. And people wanted MnDOT to take that into account and make sure when we define transportation equity, it is something that is reflective of people's daily experiences and how they, the type of transportation system that they deserve. We also heard that it is important for a state agency like MnDOT, that historically being called the Department of Highways, it is important to acknowledge the historic harms that are associated with the construction of the interstate system, for example. So many communities lost generational wealth and homes and businesses when we were building the highway system, and people wanted to make sure the agency does not shy away from that history and own it up. We also heard that our future policies and programming efforts and funding decisions and decision-making processes need to take into account in ways to address those historic harms. We still don't know how that will be done, but it is something that we have heard a lot and documented often and in many circles. It was one of those things that were coming up a lot. A few other things that we have heard about geographic differences in the type of needs that exist across the state, as well as the need for the definition to be more inclusive. We took everything that we have heard, generated a report, and then we had additional discussions with MnDOT leadership. So the focus on the top, senior leadership team, as well as executive leadership team. So that includes the commissioner, deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners. And then we shared what we have heard from Minnesota communities about transportation equity. We said, this is what people are saying. This is how, again, the process to define transportation equity, it was really important for us to make sure it is grounded on community voices and it's not staff-led. We could have done that. I could have done some research and say, this is what the academics are saying, this is what some of the organizations are saying, maybe this is how we're supposed to define. But we didn't do that. We had these community representatives, the equity group members, proposed initial draft, and then we took that to the public and community-based organizations and equity advocates. to make sure the definition is not something that is just MnDOT definition, it is something that people can resonate with. So we shared that with our leadership team, and leaders had additional conversations about it. I mean, initially, there was a lot of conversations about some of the language, whether, what does this mean for other communities? For example, we were using, Edward have been saying a lot, using the word buyback a lot. The definition was using buyback as well, the rationale for using that. And whether if we use buyback, what does that mean for people with disabilities? Should we be also using that? Should we also include folks with income? Initially, eventually we ended up with definition that I'll show you that is sort of like, I feel like will get us where we need to be. But the leadership conversations, even though it took some time to make sure we engage in those conversations, ended up with even a stronger and more commitment to transportation equity. What was initially a small effort to define transportation equity evolved into a development system of commitment to transportation equity, as well as the definition and acknowledgement. So I will share those with you. And these are the three things that I just talked about: acknowledgement of transportation inequities, so owning up the history of the system, and then defining what transportation equity is, and then putting in place a more clear commitment to transportation equity, so that this could be a guidance for staff, for any decision making at MnDOT, no matter where they are with the agency. They have, when they think about transportation equity or equity in general, they have somewhere to stand. They have language to consult with, so that then they can evaluate and critique their decision-making processes, and whatever they're doing against the words that we're putting in place. Starting, is there a way that I can zoom in? No?
Here, you can use my glasses.
You can look at the screen behind you.
That one behind you.
No, I am good. I want to make sure everybody can see it.
Turn around.
The materials were sent out as well,
Yeah?
so people can refer back if needed. I sent out all the materials.
Okay,
Yeah, we've had the material, so.
Okay. No zoom in? Okay. There's a button here, I don't know what it does, but I don't want to try. So we wanted to start with this 3-sentence statement that says MnDOT acknowledges the transportation system and agency decisions have underserved, excluded, and harmed some of our harm and overburden some communities. We understand some of our past decisions denied Black, Indigenous communities, as well as people with disabilities, the full participation of transportation benefits. These and other underserved communities have historically carried transportation burdens, disproportionate burdens of transportation decisions. We wanted to make sure, this is what we have been hearing from people. People have been saying MnDOT has to acknowledge the inequities that have been, the system has created, the laws of generational wealth, the loss of homes and cultural resources and businesses. So this hopefully gets to that. It is a still draft format, so please let us know what you think. But this is that acknowledgement statement. It is part of that plan that I mentioned, so it will be, when it's adopted, will be a formal part of MnDOT documents, which will also be released for public comment period in the next week or so. Some of you have probably seen this already, that plan already. And this is the statement of commitment, 1-sentence commitment to transportation equity. There's more to come, but we wanted, before we define transportation equity, we wanted to say MnDOT is committed to creating an equitable transportation system. Say that, and then define what that means. So that the portion that is underlined is the definition that says transportation equity means the benefits and burdens of transportation systems, services, and spending are fair and just, which historically has not been the case. Transportation equity requires ensuring underserved communities, especially Black and Indigenous and people of color, sharing the power of decision making. There are a lot of things to talk about here, but one of the main things that we wanted to underline here is actually do the acknowledgement here too. Say that what we want the system to be is that for it to be fair and just. And that is not only the benefits of the transportation system, but it's also the burdens. Sometimes it's obvious that the transportation benefits are there, but sometimes some communities might be carrying more burdens than they have access to benefits, and that is important. It is important for us to weigh not only the benefits but also the burdens. If your commute time is faster because of a new construction, but some other individual now has to, maybe, I don't know, like during the construction they carry more inconveniences, that's a burden that maybe that's a little bit too trivial, but the point is to make sure that we think about both benefits and burdens. And we are defining what those mean further. All the terms like burdens and benefits and fair and just, buyback and sharing power have also been further defined. I don't have that right now because it will take a long time to go through it, but we wanted to make sure every main word that we use is also further defined. So our staff, for example, and all the decision makers, when they look at this, they have something that they can go back that is clear and ambiguous. I also want to call out that we are using fair and just together because fair, we got a lot of criticism that fair, if you use it alone, is closer to equality and not really equity. And we wanted to make sure we say fair and just, which gets us closer to equity there. We wanted to introduce the concept of sharing power here because historically one of the ways that we ended up with where we were excluded and harmed some communities was because community members have been absent from decision-making tables. In South Minneapolis, when 35W was built through Phillips neighborhood in Minneapolis, 600 feet, we only hosted, first of all, we hosted only one meeting, one public hearing, and even though 650 people attended that one meeting, there were no single black person that attended the meeting, even though the folks that lost, most of the people that lost their homes and businesses were black people. So that type of decision making and insufficient decision making is something that we are hoping not to repeat. A couple more things here that gets into what the journey ahead looks like, and this is again MnDOT language. So for MnDOT, this means to keep and continue listening to communities and learn from community expertise, and start implementing and making systemic changes as we learn from communities. And then this is one about partnerships. We acknowledge that it will take many of us. MnDOT alone or staff alone will not be able to achieve this. It will take all of us. MnDOT employees, community partners, all governmental partners from all different levels, as well as our tribal nation representatives and partners. One thing that I wanted to call out here is that for the agency, at the agency level, one thing that we're developing right now is staff training on transportation equity to make sure people understand what transportation equity is and what their role looks like, so that then they feel confident that they can visualize in their own individual programs and projects and plans, they can take equity into consideration in anything that we do. So that will help there. Just quick next steps here of where this is at right now and where we are going from here. So this definition, as I said in the beginning, is part of a formal long-range plan that we call the statewide multimodal transportation plan. That is almost being finalized now. It will be released for public comment for about a month. And the public will be able to comment about some of the language that I highlighted in the last couple of slides, as well as many other equity strategies and actions that are also part of the plan. I'm only highlighting today the definition and the commitment and the acknowledgement, but the plan includes also many transportation equity strategies and actions that we worked with the equity work group members to make sure almost everything that we do in that plan and highlighted that plan includes some equity considerations in it. We developed a series of questions that we asked people about who is benefiting from any action or any program or any project, who is potentially being disadvantaged. And things like that we call we used what we call equity lens framework. So that is part of that plan. This language is part of that plan. We're now wrapping up some internal and external stakeholder engagement conversations about the definition. First, to kind of share where we are and also collect additional feedback. And then we will publish this when we wrap this up in one of them in our MnDOT website. We have a site specifically for our transportation equity advancement or initiatives. And everybody, like our partners, also welcome to use this definition or create their own versions, a little bit tweaked to their own needs. Already Selena and I have been having some conversations about it, so people are welcome to use this definition. I'm happy to share the report that we have about 23-page long report that we generated from the community conversations and discussions that we had to develop and get to where we are. And then, as I said, we are also focusing on more action planning and implementation, as well as transportation equity training for our new staff. So people don't say, well, you gave me the definition, but I don't know what to do with it. We want to make sure we provide the training that they need so that they feel confident they can do the work. I will just stop there. That was very fast, but I want to make sure there's time for discussions and questions and yeah, go ahead.
Just got a quick question. You said earlier that you guys are still welcoming feedback?
Yes.
So how does a person submit feedback? On the website, or how do you?
So when this, as I was saying, there will be public comment period. So that there will be, it's called minnesotago.org. That website will have this plan, which includes this language, and there will be places to comment on it. But my email is also on the next slide. So you can also directly send me feedback. I actually prefer that. If it's about this definition, I will make sure I watch that closely. So if you send me your feedback, and I'm sure it was also part of some of the emails that were sent in preparation for this meeting. So my email is in there as well. So you can send me your thoughts. Thank you. But if you also want to share now, you can share.
No.
Okay.
I just have a quick question on this, just either you or Selena can comment. So where's the Met Council, Metro Transit in all of this? Is anybody from the Met Council or Metro Transit in the official stakeholder group?
I will say one quick thing, and then maybe I'll let Selena say. So Met Council is there's a representation of Met Council on the Equity Work Group members. So Heidi,
Heidi, not me. No. Heidi from MTS.
Heidi,
okay.
And Amy was the initial person, Venowitz, and then Heidi was on that group, and she played a critical role in putting together the initial drafts and then reviewing it. And the definition that I just shared went through so many different stages to get to where it is. Even though it's just 2 sentences statement, it took almost 2 years to develop that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Abdullahi. And Heidi, when I started on Metro Transit, and one of the charge was to adopt a transit equity statement. I connected with Heidi as I reached out to MTS, and she connected me to Abdullahi just to align the efforts. And Abdullahi and I have been in touch as often as we could in terms of how his project with the multi-modal policy plan and the definition of transportation equity was going to inform the adoption of the transit equity statement that Metro Transit did early this year. So we have followed a lot of leads and lessons from the process that MnDOT has taken, but Heidi continues to be involved in that process.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Edward?
Is there somebody else that will go before me? Hey, can we go back to the definition?
Yes,
real quick?
absolutely. And you guys comments for me.
Well, when I read this, and let's just say I'm the benefactor of what this definition means. I have a minority business enterprise, and obviously I would be concerned about the equity. And then my cousin, who has a majority firm, is kind of looking at this too. as the minority business enterprise, I would go, wow, fair and just, this is great. They're finally going to get their crap together and they're gonna use me and they're gonna give me some special consideration. My cousin, who has the majority firm and not hiring anybody of color on his staff, but he's my cousin, is saying, hey, wait a minute. This definition seems to be excluding me. It's telling me you no longer have a place to participate and be a part of it. So that could be justifiable when you consider 30 years of disparity studies the state of Minnesota has paid for. The last one costing $1.8 million, done by Keene Research Group. And in each of those studies, which are done after a 10-year period of time to justify a race-neutral contracting approach, which is what the state currently operates in. And it shows in those reports there is underutilization of Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, disability, and women business enterprises. The transportation department. It's been 30 years historically. They've never reached that proverbial minimum benchmark for utilization of those businesses. In fact, Black businesses should be getting somewhere around 10% of all the contracting opportunities, a little bit more. They've never gone above 2% in those 30 years, each year for 30 years, okay? So you could, this reads like a race preference initiative. And I'm not saying that foundationally it couldn't be done, but it would definitely be challenged by majority firms like the Association of General Contractors and others who would say, hey, wait a minute, you're not cutting us out of this because we've had this great quid pro quo going on where we depress equal opportunity laws and don't comply with them in order for you to underutilize Black business enterprises and others. Therefore, we get more of the opportunity because those dollars have to be spent within a certain period of time. And that's how you see overutilization of them and underutilization of business enterprises. That's the quid pro quo system that goes on inside of state government because they are controlling it. The other thing they do is they get us in a cycle of planning equity. 2 years you've been working on this definition in order for the plan to be developed. And in 2 years, they've seen billions of dollars flow through to basically get freeways and roads and bridges and stuff built in here. And I drive through the metropolitan area and I have not seen one Black person working on any highway or interstate fixing anything. I haven't seen one Asian. I haven't seen one Native American. I can't be totally sure about that, you know, in terms of race and stuff, but they don't appear to be that way to me. There's some very tan people out there and stuff, but when I look closer, I go, that's not it. Just drive through. When I was coming in today, not one. And it's visual. It's right there in our face, and we see it. So I would be careful with the definition because of the people who are behind wanting these things to be challenged in order to derail them, very good intentions, okay? That's all I'm saying, is do that. And it's one thing for me to criticize it, but what I will do is email you some language that I think is good. You don't have to take it. It can be in the mix, but for consideration. The other thing, if you go to the next slide, is this. With that totally empowering kind of thing as the minority business enterprise here, that you're gonna do all of this stuff and I'm gonna be emancipated from this injustice that's been going on for 30 years. In here you say, well, you know, it's gonna take us a long time though. Don't get upset at us. We're gonna try our best and we apologize right now. We may not get it right the first try, but on the second, third, fourth, or fifth one I will. Then I lost all hope. You know what I'm saying? You are unapologetic in answering the clarion call that people said you should in that definition. But then you go to this one and you say, wait a minute now, you know, let's do a disclaimer on what we're saying. we may not, achieve this and we're gonna try our best. I'll send you some language on that one too. But if you're gonna go there, then let's go there. Let's talk about making it happen. I think the justification exists based on those 30 years of the studies. Case law, Croson versus Richmond, Virginia, basically says you can go to a race contest if you are using a methodology in your disparity study that meets the strict scrutiny of the courts, and the state has done that. And it shows that there's underutilization. If there's underutilization, then you can move to a race-conscious approach if the state see a compelling reason to do so. Okay? So I think the definition is good, but I think it can, probably not perk up some of the folks who would fight against that altogether. But that is unacceptable to me. You can't be apologetic. You cannot say, well, it's not gonna be overnight. Yeah, it should be overnight. It should have been yesterday. It should have been 30 years ago. So I can't accept that one. That one has to be written so that it's matter of fact, that you're gonna do this. This journey is gonna begin now, and it's going to achieve equity for all. It has to say that. And I play with this after I read it and I wrote things, so I don't wanna just come here, you think I'm just criticizing the stuff. I'll send that information around to you, you can take a look at it. And if you think it makes sense and can be utilized or blended in some kind of way, then do it. But, so I did that on both of them. That was just my take on reading it.
Well, the last sentence, maybe you can put that first.
Which one?
Flip the sentences.
So this is good. I'll just start with this. This is really good advice, and I think this is one of the things that we probably need to change, because we also heard this from another group that said, "Why are you saying we will not transform our transportation system? It was just overnight." We'll need to say something like, "We will transform our transportation system by."
It's an ongoing effort. Maybe
Yes, or something.
like that.
We'll have to rewrite this. You are right, and it just doesn't read right.
I'll just read what I wrote.
Okay.
I said, we will begin the transformation process immediately to achieve the intent of the equity definition. It is our expectation to use legal compliance, listening, learning, changing, implementing, and adopting to correct historical lost opportunities for, you all use BIPOP, so I'll throw that in there, BIPOP, because I can't stand that, I'm not a BIPOP. That's not even a legal definition or construct for me, okay? And I'm not gonna go into all of that, but I'm just saying BIPOP is something.
Please go into that, because I think that's two people in New York came up with that, now that's the new buzzword.
Yes, it's two people. The Constitution says the Department of Management and Budget is to do a census count. They create a division of census. The Census Bureau then is the one that does the count and give us identifiers, okay? And today the identifier for me is African American and Black. It is Latino and Hispanic. It's Asian and Pacific Islander. It's American Indian and Indigenous, I think, the other ones. So this BIPOP has no legal standing in federal law or state law. In state law, if you want to use an acronym that aggregate us all together, it's called protected group members. It can be found under Minnesota Statute 43A. The affirmative action laws. And if you want to include a protected class, a protected group members, I'll define what those are. In the statute, it's defined them as Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, persons with disabilities, and women. Those are the protected groups because of historical atrocities and unjust things committed against them. Protected class is defined under Minnesota Statute 3638, our human rights statute. And it's a little bit more expansive with income, with religion, sexual orientation, and a number of other things that are in there. So BIPOP in here, for somebody like me or a legal person, if it went to court, it has no standing. It's not codified in law anywhere. It's just, like he said, two women who invented this, and it got the wave of liberal people in some place like Minnesota. It's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's confuse them with this one now. They're not minorities, they're not people of color, you know, and also just to dwell on that a little bit more, when you do those aggregates of us, it gives the people inside the system the chance to find their preference, because they will report the results in the aggregate. The BIPOC people did this, but they omit the underutilization or no utilization of Black people, because we are now the aggregate of all of that, but we're very different. We bring very different things to the table. So people should be forced to define and report out and analyze for utilization me as a Black and African American as defined under constitutional principles and federal law and state law. So that's all I'm saying. So you can use it if you want to, that's fine, but there are a lot of people that listen to it and say, when they hear it, they don't even know. And they're the ones inside here doing this for us. That's how some people do it. I would never do that to you all.
We are running a little bit over time,
Okay.
so
Anyway.
I'll just entertain one more question from anybody. Councilmember Steiner?
Yeah, just to add a second to Edward's information, but the other thing is, you talked about early on that you look at different modes, and we're talking about diversity, and of course this is Equity Advisory Committee, but like, what about bicyclers and walkers and that? You know, because they have the rights to the bike lane that Edward talked about coming here, and that, or, you know, people of economic things, homelessness, and that, they rely on a lot of these ones, and I don't think we're even mentioning it as much here, and then, you know, with it, so I just think there's a little bit more flavor on types of modes, so we have a multi-mode from, you know, wheelchairs to walking to strollers all the way to bicycles, et cetera, you know, on there.
That's a good point. Can I say,
You can respond to that and then I have to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just quickly on the definition, I think I have an answer to that both for what you said in the beginning about like, oh, some groups would think this definition is very exclusive and now I'm not included. And also like, what about the different types of modes? Those actually both came up a lot. In one instance, I think we heard like a version of like, this might be a refers to racism, right? Which I don't think it is. But the definition evolved from that initial version. So now there is something, if you see, there's underserved communities within the definition. When the way we're defining underserved communities includes all the protected class members that you listed, all of them, right? So nobody is really excluded from this definition. It even includes people like that with modal needs. So the definition by nature is inclusive. The reason you see the visibility of Black and Indigenous communities, and I'm also not a big fan of BIPOC, but just this is the closest we can get to in a short sentence. But one thing that we were very intentional was to lead with the experiences of Black people and Indigenous communities, because the historic inequities that these two communities face are not still like close to any other historically or currently harmed community, right? Nothing comes closer to the type of genocide the Native Americans faced or the slavery. And we wanted to make sure that shows in the definition. Yes, it gets a little bit tricky when you add and people of color, it expands a little bit more, and now we also have underserved communities. This is not perfect definition, but we wanted to lead with the experiences of the groups that have been harmed the most in the past, so that in the definition, and that is something that we are further defining, and those explanations are mentioned in those glossary of terms that we developed for this. I'll just leave it there for now, but a lot of good comments, and please send me what you have on the next slide.
I will send it. Mr. Chair, can I just do one more thing?
I wanted to add to it just a little bit
Just
too.
1 second, please. Member Co-Chair Leah, question or comment?
My comment is similar to comments I've made in other presentations, which is that it makes me uncomfortable to only call out the disadvantages without calling out the advantages, that absolves people of responsibility, which I think isn't fair. It would be good in the definition if you said, our current, our historic and current practices have allowed for colonization of the state by white people, have allowed white people to amass wealth and access jobs and gain property and all those things. So I think to call it the advantages is really important.
Any other comments?
Oh, I just wanted to add to his question about the transportation, mobility. I just left MnDOT and I was working on that area. So I just wanted to tell you that is a livability department that MnDOT has as well, and they focus on the livability of other modes of transportation. So if you want to learn a little bit about that, they have a whole committee that works on ped and bike explicitly. So nothing else but ped and bike. So pedestrian and bicycle or other cycling, such as like scooters and stuff like that, that they're getting more into transportation. So it's the livability department, and they work closely with the transportation equity department on those other modes of transportation. If you wanted just to learn a little bit, or even join a committee
Or even
on
the
ped and
language come
bike.
together a little bit, you know.
Yeah, we work together, so.
All right, excellent. I just have one last comment, I guess. Everything is fine and people can have different opinions about the terms used, etc. I really hated that thing of if we don't get it right at first. I will say that if you don't get it right, somebody's gonna get fired. I mean, there's no excuse, rationale, or explanation for not getting it right 30 years ago, much less right now or tomorrow. I have no idea why that is in there, but take it out if you can. And actually, I would include language that said we will hold people accountable for implementing this totally, completely, fully. Add more adjectives to that tomorrow or before 2025, whatever. But that wishy-washy statement, I have more choice words in Spanish because I'm in English.
Say a few.
I'll leave it there. But
I won't translate them in the notes, no.
okay, well, thank you very much, Mahatsani. Yeah, this is great process. I really enjoy listening to the engagement part and the effort that went to crafting this, and the fact that you're willing to listen to our feedback. That's great too. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
I think committee business is where we are.
Committee business, that's right.
All right, so we have 2 items of committee business to share. The first is we've had a couple people express interest in becoming the next co-chair. If you are still considering it, people that are in this room, we hope that we can get little statements or things that you could share about yourself and why you're interested in it at the August meeting. And since there's so few of us here tonight, we'll share that out by email too, so other people know. And the second is Edward and I, and also we've gotten some input from Bran, and Michael's expressed interest in providing some input, have drafted some feedback on the equity policy, which Lila shared with us last month, and the anti-racism definition, which I shared last month, that we're gonna circulate to everybody. And you are free to say, yes, I agree with this feedback, this represents what I'd like to share. Or if you have some edits you'd suggest, we'd love to hear those edits and feedback. Or if you'd like to give your own feedback directly to Lila or Sai, I don't want to close off those avenues too. We want to make sure that your perspective is heard and included in whichever way that works best for you. So we'll share out the draft this week by email, and then with that kind of reminder that your input and voice is important as well and can be shared in other ways.
discuss what's the process for electing the co-chair or?
We said that we would get candidate interest next month, and the co-chairs would make a recommendation to the committee that the committee could then vote on our recommendation.
And just to clarify, because there's no process in our bylaws or procedures, so we're really just doing basically what has been the practice before. So in case folks are trying to figure out, oh, how do I submit my interest or my application, it's really not a process. We're just doing it as we speak, so bear with us on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think we can turn it over to see if anyone else has an announcement or anything that they'd like to share, do you have anything from the standing committees, the Met Council standing committees that?
Actually, the main thing from the Transportation Committee was this issue of the microtransit and the pilot project, which of course was already covered, but that was one of the most interesting issues that we discussed in transportation that I can recall. Yeah, so I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, has anything come up at management?
Management, the Met Council budget is always an issue, but there's more of an issue now than ever, so just stay tuned about that, because the financial aspect of our operations, it's gonna face some challenges in the short and long term. I don't want to go into all the details, but frankly, I don't know or remember a lot of them, but that's just the main thing. That stay tuned for more information about the financial aspects of this, especially if the legislature doesn't approve more funding.
Councilmember Sterner, is there anything from the Environment Committee or anything you'd like to add about the trip?
Well, just on the transportation, that their numbers are starting to go up, but I get, and one of the groups that we had the least loss on was our Black community, for the ridership it had.
That's right.
And then with the Environment Committee, we got a grant for some of the work we did with COVID and the water, but so the grant will help us kind of also target disadvantaged communities or people of color as well. And then we're looking at hiring, I think, Met Council and all that, we're looking at diversity hiring, and that's important too as well. So.
Right. Are there any other announcements, including from staff, that I might have forgotten to talk about? No? Committee members, do you have any announcements that you'd like to share? Go ahead, Edward.
Can we have on the agenda next meeting how we get more quantitative reports, like hiring, what were the benchmarks set for internal hires, contracting, what the benchmarks were, what progress we're making towards meeting those or not meeting those, and what are the plans to make sure that at the end of the year, we are on target with contracting opportunities in an equitable fashion, utilizing all Minnesotans that are willing, able, and available to do something with the Met Council. Can we talk about that and start adding that as a report that would come before our group on a monthly basis?
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything else? I just have one quick question. Who brought that massive box of chocolates?
You guys outside walking with it.
Oh,
Ashanti.
Oh,
Got it
Ashanti.
for our unit, yeah.
oh, did
Yeah.
Nice.
Brought it.
That's nice.
Greatly appreciated. What are the rest of you all gonna have?
We missed her birthday last month too, so.
Happy birthday, what was your birthday?
Thank you, June 15th.
Oh.
I'm 21 now, finally legal, so anybody wanna take me out, let me know. Well, thank you guys.
I'll let you have all the candy for your birthday.
All right, well, if there's no other business, so thank you very much, and we declare this meeting adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Good to see you.
Wow, it's like,
that is.
I think we met at the